Hello, it's me, in bad lighting, again. I am ready with my little I read banned books pin. You cannot see it because my camera quality is terrible. In high school and all the way down through elementary school, obviously, there were assigned books we had to read, and so I thought it'd be fun to kind of look back on those now that I am graduated and kind of see my opinions about them and kind of how I feel about these certain stories. Let's get into it. So we're going to try and go in order of when I read them, so starting with the book I read first and going up through the book I read last. Let me explain my tiers first before we begin. The top tier is would read on my own time. These are books that I genuinely enjoyed, or possibly even books that I thought about reading before they were assigned to me in class. Better Than I Expected is, I didn't expect to like this, but I actually did end up liking it. It's probably not a would read on my own time, but still very good. I Don't Remember You is for the books that I just have no memory of. Could Be Worst is it's not bottom of the barrel, but I didn't enjoy it a ton either. And Thanks I Hate It is for the books I didn't like. With all that aside, let's just get into it. Starting with Island of the Blue Dolphins, this is going in I Don't Remember You because I remember reading this one, and there's a really sad scene specifically that I remember, but I did have to text my friend and be like, hey, do you remember that book we read in 5th grade about, the one girl on the island? The plot is non-existent in my mind. I don't remember what happens. I believe I liked it when I read it. I was in, 5th grade, though, so it's been a while. Next up is Maniac Magee, which is going in Could Be Worse. Listen, I read this in 5th grade. We read it as a class. At the time that we read it, I was like, it's not my favorite, but it's fine. And then we read it again in 6th grade, and I was like, oh, okay, that's fine. That'll make at least assignments easier. And then we read it again in 7th grade. I don't know what happened, if my teachers were just teaming up to make sure that we read this book no matter what, but I was dying. And it's not even that it's a terrible book. I just didn't... It's one book that I think I would like to reread because there are some really heavy themes and topics that it touches on that I just didn't understand fully because I was so young. There's a big racial aspect. I remember, spoilers I guess, the main character ends up staying with this one guy and he ends up passing away. I read it so much and it was never a favorite of mine, and so I just got real sick of it. Moving on, running out of time. We're gonna put this on would read in my own time. The plot for this one is super unique and interesting. The idea is that there's this girl and her family. They live out in the West in the late 1800s. By the way, it's raining outside, and apparently now there's thunder, so that's cute. Anyway, it turns out she's not living in the 1800s. It's actually the 1990s, and they're in this essentially dome, and people can view them. And I don't want to give spoilers, because I did really enjoy this book, but part of the reason I put this in would read on my own time is I do remember looking at this book in the library, in the school library, and thinking that sounds really interesting, and then we ended up reading it in class, and so genuinely enjoyed it, thought it's a really good book. Next up is Wonder. This one's going to go on better than I expected. I don't think I would have picked this one up on my own time, but I genuinely do enjoy this, and in middle school, I believe, we got to go see the movie as a school, and it's just a genuinely good and sad but also kind of heartwarming story. Very big emphasis on bullying and how it affects kids, and I do remember really liking this one. Next up is Midsummer Night's Dream. We're gonna put this in I Don't Remember You because we read it in 7th grade, and listen, 7th grade, me's brain was not prepared for Shakespeare. We did get to watch a performance of it, and I did enjoy the performance because I didn't have to sit there and try and decipher the words. You can just watch them do the actions, and your brain can usually figure it out. The only thing I remember from this, though, is that someone falls in love with, a donkey or something like that. Diary of Anne Frank. We didn't actually read her diary, but we did read the play that they've made based off of, the diary and her life events. It's gonna go on better than I expected. It's probably not something I would have picked up and read in my own time, but that doesn't mean it's not a good story, and obviously it's a very heart-wrenching story due to the themes and situations that she was in during the time. Now we're on to 9th grade. First off was Romeo and Juliet. This is going in Thanks I Hate It. I'm sorry, I've never liked this story. I think part of the reason is because Shakespeare does frame it as a cautionary tale, kind of what you shouldn't do, but also similarly ways that these two families could have avoided their children killing themselves. But instead just gets framed as like, oh, these tragic lovers, and it gets set up as this great romance, and I don't think it's a story that we should idolize like that. And lastly from this grade is To Kill a Mockingbird, which is going in better than I expected. This one is a very slow story. It takes its time, but I didn't feel that anything in it was unnecessary. I feel like it sets up the characters very well. Obviously, the themes of racism are very important. Speaking of banned books, this is one that has been targeted a lot, which I think is very unfortunate because I think it does have a very important message that really needs to be heard right now. All that aside, let's move on to 10th grade. We'll start with Unwind, because this one is going would read on my own time. This is one I actually really want to reread. So Unwind is a dystopia. Can't remember what they're called, but this war that happened between pro-life and pro-choice. In the end, what happened is they decided that they would essentially, if I'm remembering this correctly, there would be no abortions. However, once children reached the age of 13, parents could sign up to have them unwound, basically meaning that they would slowly take them apart and then reuse their organs for people that needed them. This is one I'd really like to read now that Roe v. Wade is overturned. I think I would have a much different perspective on it. But overall, the dystopian aspect is very strong, and I really liked the story and the characters. So yeah, would read on my own time. I really enjoyed this one. Okay, next up is 12 Angry Men. I'm in between I Don't Remember You and Better Than I Expected, because I do remember it, but it is just kind of middle ground for me. I do think I will do Better Than I Expected, because the idea for this one is it's a play, and there are 12 men on a jury, and they have to decide whether this boy is guilty or not. And they have to have a unanimous vote. And so they start, and 11 people say he's guilty, and one person says he's not guilty. And by the end of the play, they all say they're not guilty. And I like the way that it shows them deciphering the evidence and going through everything. And at the end, there's a really heartbreaking scene where they finally break through to the last guy, and he admits that the boy is not guilty. And it's overall pretty good, just kind of slower because it is just, essentially a jury meeting. But I'll put in Better Than I Expected. And then we have Anthem by Ayn Rand. Ayn Rand? How to pronounce her name. She's Russian though, so Ayn Rand?
Ayn Rand.
I have no idea. But would read on my own time. Again, it's another dystopia. It's based heavily off of communism, but taken to an extreme. So, for example, whenever the main character is referring to himself, he always uses we. Talks in multiples like that, because that is their society, is you have no individuality whatsoever. Despite
Ayn Rand
being kind of not the greatest person, it is a very good story. And I love the character kind of coming into his own and experimenting and discovering electricity, discovering the word I. It's a really cool idea and story, and I really like how it's done. I don't know if this one counts, but this is My Sister's Keeper. We're going to put it in would read on my own time because I did read it on my own time. The way they did it in, I believe it was 10th grade, is we would have these assignments for books, and we got to choose one of 5 books. Unwind and My Sister's Keeper were one of those 5, and I chose Unwind instead. However, I was still curious about that, so I read it later on. I like this book. I kind of hate the ending. I had the ending spoiled for me, and yet it still made me kind of upset, even though I knew what was going to happen. So that's my biggest complaint, is I didn't like the ending. There was a relationship between 2 of the characters that I just was not vibing with. I didn't really like it. But because I went ahead and read it, even though it wasn't required for school, I'm going to put it in would read on my own time. Next up, Outliers. I hate this book so much. It is so boring. On top of the fact that I have a memory tied with it of I had to finish it by the next day, and I still had 200 pages to read, and I'm not a super fast reader, so I just read through all of it in 4 hours, and I felt miserable and awful, and I cried, I'm pretty sure. And there's a 50-page chapter on plane crashes, and it is described in the most boring detail possible, and oh my goodness, I hate this book. Because part of the reason I chose this one was because it seemed like it was going to talk about how successful people become successful. And it kind of did that, but also it kind of just you want to know how they became successful? They were lucky. That's it. They were just in the right place at the right time. Come on. Moving on. The Book Thief, would read on my own time. Again, genuinely really loved this book. It's very heart-wrenching. Hello, Editing Sappy here to actually give you the reasons why I liked this book, because I didn't explain it very well the first time around. There was a lot of things I really liked about this book. I thought having Death as the narrator was a really interesting twist and sort of take on that position in a story. I also enjoyed getting a view of the Holocaust from kind of someone who was living in Germany that wasn't Jewish, just kind of looking on it from the outside, but still, realizing that, hey, this is wrong and here's how it's hurting people. The ending is very devastating, but I really enjoyed the story. Alright, finally we are on to 11th and 12th grade, my last final years of high school. Starting with The Great Gatsby, thanks, I hate it. I've noticed over the years that I am very much someone who prefers simple prose. I don't really love super flowery over-the-top prose. I don't want to have to try and decipher what you're saying. And so I think that's part of the reason that The Great Gatsby really bothered me. It's just I was like, I feel like I just don't know what's going on. Like, the story's getting lost behind the prose. When I watched the movie, I was like, oh, I get it now. Also, okay, listen, Tobey Maguire is like the perfect Nick. Like, he just plays that like awkward, I don't really know why I'm here vibe so well. I love it. Next up, Trevor Noah, Born a Crime. Better than I expected. This is one I also had wanted to read. I don't think it was like my favorite book on the list, which is why I'm going to put would read in my own time, but I also thought it was very good. It was really interesting hearing his stories growing up as a mixed race person in apartheid South Africa, so enjoyed it. Finally, ending on a sour note, The Music Lesson by Victor Wooten. Thanks, I hate it. It was just too bizarre for me. There's like this one character that's like teaching him the meaning of music and stuff, and it just kind of drove me wild. I hated him. I really did not like that character, and yet he's such an integral part of the story. I took so many notes. Here's my notes on my app. It's so many. For example, there's a line in here that says, I threw my hands up in frustration, and then I put me at this entire book. Not my favorite one I've ever read, not by a long shot, but alright, well, this is my final ranking. I had a fair few I hated, but I also had a lot that I actually really liked. I think it's important to teach kids reading and for them to understand how important some of these stories are and their themes in order to be more understanding. Basically, stop banning books. Not that I get too political on my channel, but this is a stance that I very much believe in. Alright, I think that's all. See you guys later.